Imagine a world where the drums of war never cease, where kingdoms are locked in an eternal cycle of conflict. At first glance, it might seem like a setting ripe with drama and excitement. But what if I told you that perpetual war settings in fantasy could be one of the biggest pitfalls in storytelling? I've been writing and consuming fantasy stories for over 2 decades now, and in today's video, we're going to explore why endless war can be a double-edged sword in fantasy world building. In a perpetual war setting, the world is trapped in an endless cycle of conflict with no clear resolution or peace in sight. When we think about such settings, it's easy to imagine grand battles, heroic deeds, and unending tension. However, there's a significant downside to this approach. One of the primary issues with an endless war setting is that it can lead to narrative stagnation. When a story revolves entirely around conflict, it can become predictable and monotonous. The excitement of battle scenes may grab attention initially, but over time, the repetitive nature of these scenes can wear thin. Readers and viewers might find themselves longing for more variety and depth in the narrative. I still remember when I first started writing fantasy. As a teenager, I was obsessed with creating epic battle scenes. But after a while, I realized my characters weren't growing, they were just fighting. That's when I knew I had to change my approach. Consider J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. While this series involves significant conflict, it is not defined by constant warfare. Instead, the war serves as a context for rich character development, personal quests, and deep themes such as friendship, sacrifice, and hope. The moments of peace, reflection, and personal interaction give the story depth and allow readers to connect with the characters on a more profound level. This balance creates a more engaging and multifaceted narrative. A world locked in constant war lacks this exact balance. As a result, characters have little time for personal growth or to explore other facets of the world. Their motivations and development become tied solely to the war effort, which can limit their complexity and relatability. I've often found that the most compelling parts of a story are the quiet moments of introspection, where characters reveal their true selves. It's those themes that stick with me long after I've finished reading or watching something. For example, think about how much richer a character like Arya Stark from Game of Thrones becomes when her storyline eventually diverges from the battlefield, allowing her to grow through personal quests and diverse experiences. Now, beyond characters though, perpetual war can also lead to an overall flat and one-dimensional setting. War impacts societies in profound ways, but if not handled with nuance, it can reduce the world to a series of battlefields, devoid of culture, economy, and everyday life. A compelling fantasy world should feel lived in, with layers of history, mythology, and social dynamics that exist beyond the scope of war. George R.R. Martin does this effectively by showing the impact of war on the everyday lives of the people in Westeros. We see the political intrigue, the economic struggles, and the social upheaval that war brings. By doing so, the ever-looming threat of war becomes something that enhances the rest of the story rather than completely overshadowing it. But the risks of perpetual war settings go even further than what we've discussed so far. Perpetual war settings can drastically limit the range of storytelling opportunities, which causes several negative impacts. One significant drawback is the reduction of narrative tension. When a story is consistently centered around conflict, the constant barrage of battles and skirmishes can desensitize the audience. The initial thrill of combat scenes loses its edge, making it difficult to maintain suspense and engagement. Think about the last time you watched a series where battles were the main focus. Did you find yourself predicting the next clash? This predictability can drain the excitement from the narrative, turning it into a series of expected events. Moreover, such settings often fail to explore the psychological impact of war on individuals and societies. Endless war narratives can overlook the profound emotional and mental toll that prolonged conflict imposes. Characters in these settings might be portrayed as perpetually resilient warriors, but this neglects the opportunity to delve into themes of trauma, recovery, and the quest for peace. Exploring these aspects can add depth and relatability to characters, making their struggles more human. Now, we cannot ignore the potential consequences in terms of world building either. A society portrayed as perpetually at war may lack the nuanced depiction of economic, cultural, and social dynamics that make a world feel alive and believable. Continuous warfare should logically deplete resources, destabilize economies, and lead to widespread societal collapse. However, many fantasy settings gloss over these consequences, presenting worlds that function normally despite endless conflict. This inconsistency can break immersion and make settings feel less believable. Imagine a world where the impacts of war are fully realized. This would beg questions such as, how would the markets, the schools, and the everyday lives of people change? What would happen to art and culture? How would families cope with the constant loss? This isn't something we see covered in fantasy stories very often. Additionally, perpetual war settings can stifle innovation within the narrative. When the focus is solely on conflict, other storylines and creative plot developments take a backseat. This limits the scope for political intrigue, cultural evolution, and technological advancements that could enrich the narrative. For example, consider a subplot involving a technological breakthrough that could end the war. That would beg the interesting question of how different factions might react to this development. Suddenly, we have a layer of intrigue that keeps the audience guessing. Lastly, the ethical dimensions of war are often underexplored in perpetual war settings as well. Stories that continually glorify combat without addressing the moral complexities of warfare risk promoting a simplistic view of conflict. Examining the ethical dilemmas faced by characters, such as the justification for war, the consequences of violence, and the quest for peace, can make the war more meaningful and provoke thoughtful reflection in the audience. Think about it. Have you ever found yourself questioning the morality of a character's actions in a fantasy setting? When such questions are sparked within the reader, it can lead to more thought-provoking and memorable narratives. While a different medium, I still remember playing the Witcher games and agonizing over the decisions I had to make as Geralt. The moral gray areas made the story so much richer and kept me thinking long after I moved on from those decisions. Now, if you found anything useful in the video so far, please consider giving it a like to help me grow the channel. Thank you. With all the discussed pitfalls in mind, let's dive into some of the solutions for these issues. One effective strategy is to focus on the aftermath of conflict rather than the conflict itself. By exploring the consequences of war, you can delve into rich, often untapped narratives. How do societies rebuild? How do individuals cope with loss and trauma? These questions open up avenues for deep character development and complex world building. Take Harry Potter as an example. The series explores not just epic battles, but also the profound effects on its characters and world. The personal struggles of heroes like Harry, dealing with trauma and duty, create a narrative that is as introspective as it is action-packed. Another strategy is to explore peacetime politics and the complexities of maintaining peace. This can infuse your story with intrigue and conflict without resorting to endless battle scenes. The Hunger Games series, for instance, delves into the political intrigue and shifting alliances within the districts and the capital, providing conflict that goes beyond physical battles. Introducing various types of conflicts can also add depth to your story. Economic struggles, cultural clashes, and personal rivalries can be just as compelling as large-scale wars. George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series masterfully interweaves political, personal, and military conflicts to create a complex and engaging narrative. The struggle for power, the intricate relationships, and the moral dilemmas faced by characters keep the story dynamic and unpredictable. It's also beneficial to highlight the everyday lives of people within your world. Showing how ordinary people are affected by the larger events can add a layer of realism and relatability. For example, in The Lord of the Rings, we see how the lives of hobbits, farmers, and innkeepers are disrupted by the great conflict, providing a fuller picture of the consequences of the war and enriching the world. Finally, consider incorporating moral and ethical dilemmas into your story. Characters should grapple with the justification for war, the consequences of their actions, and the pursuit of peace. This not only adds depth to the characters, but also provokes thoughtful reflection in your audience. In Star Wars, the characters frequently face morally ambiguous decisions, such as the use of the Death Star or the ethics of rebellion, adding a profound layer to the narrative. Personally, I found that when my characters face tough moral decisions, it not only adds complexity to the plot, but also sparks some of the most engaging moments for me while writing a story. Even with the strategies covered so far though, some might argue that war is necessary for conflict and drama in a fantasy setting. So let's revisit the problem and address the following common counter-arguments. One argument is that war inherently provides high stakes and tension, making it an essential element of a gripping story. While it's true that war can create dramatic tension, relying solely on war for conflict can be a crutch that limits the scope of your narrative. As discussed, high stakes and tension can also arise from personal rivalries, political machinations, and moral dilemmas. For instance, in Patrick Rothfuss's The Kingkiller Chronicle, the tension often comes from personal quests, secrets, and the protagonist's internal struggles, not from large-scale battles. Another counter-argument is that without perpetual war, a story might lack excitement and action. However, action and excitement can be derived from a variety of sources as well. Consider the intense personal battles and duels in Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight archive. These moments are thrilling and full of tension, yet they don't require a setting of endless war. By focusing on individual conflicts and challenges, you can maintain excitement without falling into the trap of perpetual war. Now, some might also contend that war is a realistic aspect of human history and therefore should be prominently featured in fantasy settings. But while historical accuracy can adapt to a story, it's important to balance realism with creative storytelling. Overemphasizing war can overshadow other important aspects of world building and character development. Why not draw inspiration from history's periods of peace, reconstruction, and cultural flourishing? These eras can provide a rich foundation for storytelling that feels both realistic and diverse. Furthermore, there's also a belief that war is essential for character development as it tests characters and forces them to grow. While conflict is indeed a powerful tool for character development, it doesn't have to be war. Characters can grow through personal trials, ethical dilemmas, and interpersonal relationships. Now, don't get me wrong, there is no doubt that war can be a compelling element of a fantasy narrative. But it should not be the only source of conflict unless done so consciously and with purpose. Otherwise, it will lack the depth and details needed to make a perpetual war setting make up for the lack of variety in conflict. Now that we've addressed some common counter-arguments, let's revisit the solutions and explore more advanced tips for creating dynamic conflict without relying on perpetual war. One advanced technique is to develop multi-threaded storylines that intertwine and influence each other. This approach allows you to explore different facets of your world simultaneously. For instance, you could have one storyline focusing on political intrigue, another on personal vendettas, and a third on cultural renaissance. Each thread can impact the others, creating a complex, interwoven narrative that remains dynamic and engaging. Incorporating time jumps and flashbacks can add depth and perspective to your story while doing so. By showing the long-term consequences of war or the historical roots of current conflicts, you can provide a richer understanding of your world and its characters. This technique can effectively reveal how past events shape present motivations and relationships. And focusing on the perspectives of non-combatant characters is another way to spice things up. While warriors and leaders often take center stage, the experiences of healers, merchants, scholars, and common folk can provide a fresh viewpoint. These characters can highlight the broader societal impacts of war and peace, and their personal stories can offer relatable moments that enhance the emotional resonance of your narrative. Exploring cultural and ideological clashes can also add richness to your story and the underlying world building. Conflicts arising from differing beliefs, traditions, and values can create tension and drive the narrative forward. A good example for this is Dune by Frank Herbert, where the clash of cultures and ideologies plays a critical role in the story. Additionally, consider integrating environmental and existential conflicts. Natural disasters, scarcity of resources, and threats to the existence of the world itself can serve as powerful sources of tension. These type of conflicts can challenge characters in unique ways and push them to make difficult choices. Finally, creating unpredictable plot twists and maintaining a sense of mystery can also keep your audience engaged. By subverting expectations and introducing surprising developments, you can sustain suspense and intrigue. Think about how George R.R. Martin keeps readers on their toes with unexpected character deaths and shifting alliances in A Song of Ice and Fire. These twists keep the narrative dynamic and prevent it from becoming predictable. Now, avoiding all these pitfalls is not going to be enough though if your antagonist fails to fulfill their role in the story. Check out this video here to find 8 common antagonist mistakes and how to avoid them.